Have you ever noticed how some people apologize for everything? For taking up space, for speaking, for existing? Sorry, I didn't mean to. Sorry for bothering you. They apologize when someone bumps into them. They apologize for having an opinion. They apologize for breathing too loudly in a quiet room. And maybe you recognize this pattern. Maybe you've caught yourself saying sorry 5 times in a single conversation, even when you did nothing wrong. You apologize for asking a question, for needing something, for simply being present. And deep down, beneath all those apologies, there's a trembling question you can't silence. Am I too much? Am I a burden? Will they leave if I stop shrinking myself? Karen Horney, one of the most brilliant psychoanalysts of the 20th century, understood this pattern on a level few others reached. She saw beyond the surface politeness, beyond the social nicety, straight into the wounded psyche beneath. And what she discovered was both heartbreaking and liberating, because those constant apologies aren't about manners. They're not about being considerate or kind. They're a symptom of something much deeper, something Horney called the self-effacing personality, a psychological survival mechanism born from a soul that learned far too early that its very existence required permission. Today, we're going to uncover the hidden psychology behind chronic apologizing. We're going to understand why it happens, what it reveals about your inner world, and most importantly, how to break free from this exhausting pattern. Because Karen Horney believed that true healing begins when we stop betraying ourselves to please others. And if you've spent your life apologizing for existing, it's time to understand what your psyche has been trying to protect you from all along. Let me start with something Horney understood that most people overlook. When you apologize constantly, you're not actually sorry, you're scared. And there's a profound difference between those two states. Horney identified what she called the neurotic need for affection and approval. This isn't the healthy desire we all have to be liked or accepted. This is something far more desperate, a psychological hunger so intense that it shapes every interaction, every word, every breath. It's the feeling that if you don't constantly smooth things over, constantly make yourself smaller, constantly apologize for your presence, something terrible will happen. You'll be abandoned, rejected, exposed as the burden you secretly fear you are. And here's what Horney discovered. This need doesn't come from nowhere. It's born from a specific kind of childhood wound, one where a child learns that their value is conditional. That love must be earned through perfect behavior, through never making waves, through disappearing just enough to make everyone else comfortable. The child who was told, directly or indirectly, "Don't be so sensitive. Stop making everything about you. Why can't you just be easy?" That child learns a devastating lesson. Their natural self is wrong. Their emotions are too much. Their needs are inconvenient. And so they develop what Horney called the self-effacing solution. They become the person who apologizes for having feelings, who says sorry for needing attention, who shrinks and smooths and disappears until they're barely there at all. Because somewhere deep in their psyche, they believe this is the price of love. This is how you keep people from leaving. You make yourself so small, so undemanding, so apologetic, that surely they'll let you stay. But here's the cruel irony Horney identified. The more you apologize for existing, the less people respect you. Not because they're cruel, but because you're teaching them that you don't respect yourself. You're broadcasting a message: I don't believe I deserve to take up space. And on an unconscious level, people believe you. They start treating your time as less valuable, your opinions as less important, your presence as optional. Horney called this the tyranny of the should. You're living under a crushing set of internalized rules about how you should be. You should be quieter. You should need less. You should be grateful for whatever scraps of attention people give you. You should apologize for being human. And these shoulds, they're not coming from your true self. They're coming from a frightened, wounded part of you that learned the only way to survive was to become invisible. But survival isn't living. And Horney knew that. She knew that beneath all those apologies, beneath the self-effacement and the desperate need for approval, there's a real self trying to emerge. A self that has opinions and needs and boundaries. A self that takes up space without guilt. A self that exists not as an apology, but as an undeniable presence. The first sign. You apologize for having needs. Let's get specific about how this pattern manifests, because recognition is the first step toward freedom. And one of the clearest signs of the self-effacing personality is the way you apologize for needing anything at all. You need help? Sorry to bother you. You need emotional support. Sorry, I know you're busy. You need someone to listen. Sorry, I'm probably being dramatic. Horney understood that this goes beyond simple politeness. When you constantly apologize for having needs, you're revealing a core belief. My needs are inherently burdensome. And where does that belief come from? From a history of having your needs dismissed, minimized, or punished. Maybe you learned that asking for attention made you needy, that expressing hurt made you too sensitive, that wanting reassurance made you exhausting, and so you developed a strategy. You learned to apologize for your humanity. You learned to frame every need as an imposition, every request as a burden. Sorry, could you help me for just a second? You're not actually asking. You're begging for permission to be human, and the apology is your way of saying, I know I shouldn't need this, but I'm broken, so please forgive me for being defective. But here's what Horney would want you to understand. Needs are not defects. Needing help doesn't make you weak. Needing emotional support doesn't make you a burden. These are fundamental human requirements. And when you apologize for them, you're not being considerate. You're participating in your own erasure. Think about how this plays out in relationships. You're in pain, but you don't want to burden your partner, so you apologize before you even speak. Sorry, I know you've had a long day, but I'm really struggling. What message does that send? It says, my pain is less important than your convenience. It says, I don't actually believe I deserve support. The second sign, you absorb blame that isn't yours. Here's another pattern Horney identified, and this one cuts deep. People who constantly apologize don't just apologize for their own mistakes. They apologize for everything. Someone else is late? You apologize for the inconvenience. Someone else is in a bad mood? You apologize for existing near them. Someone else makes a mistake that affects you? You apologize for being affected. This is what Horney called moving toward people, one of the 3 neurotic trends. It's the compulsive need to merge with others, to take on their emotions, their problems, their blame. Because if you can just absorb all the negativity, if you can just make everything your fault, then maybe you can control it. Maybe you can fix it. Maybe you can finally be good enough. Think about a common scenario. You're in a meeting. Someone misunderstands your clearly stated point. Instead of clarifying, you apologize. Sorry, I probably wasn't clear, but you were clear. They weren't listening. Yet you've just taken responsibility for their inattention. You've rewritten reality to make yourself the problem. Or consider your relationships. Your partner snaps at you because they're stressed about work. A healthy response might be, I understand you're stressed, but please don't take it out on me. But what do? You apologize. Sorry, I didn't mean to bother you. You've just accepted blame for their emotional dysregulation. You've made their bad behavior your fault. Horney understood that this pattern is rooted in a desperate attempt to maintain connection. If everything is your fault, then you have control. You can fix it. you can be better. But the cruel reality is that this strategy destroys the very connection you're trying to preserve. Because when you never hold people accountable, when you absorb all the blame, you're not creating intimacy. You're creating a dynamic where you're the perpetual scapegoat. The third sign. Your identity is built on being unproblematic. Now we're getting to the core of what Horney called the idealized self. This is the false version of yourself you've constructed, the one you believe you need to be in order to be loved. And for people who constantly apologize, that idealized self has one primary characteristic: being completely, utterly, exhaustingly unproblematic. You pride yourself on being low maintenance, easygoing, flexible. You're the person who always says, "I don't mind. Whatever you want is fine." You're the one who can be cancelled on last minute, and you'll smile and say, "No worries, we'll reschedule." You've built an entire identity around being the person who requires nothing. But Horney understood that this isn't actually your true self. This is a defensive structure, a psychological armor you've built to protect yourself from the thing you fear most: rejection. Because if you're completely unproblematic, if you never ask for anything, if you're always apologizing, then surely no one can leave you. Except you're not safe. You're invisible. Horney wrote about the conflict between the real self and the idealized self. Your real self has needs, opinions, boundaries, preferences. It gets angry sometimes. It wants things. It takes up space. But your idealized self, the one you've created to survive, has none of that. It's a blank slate, a mirror, a void shaped like a person. And here's where it gets painful. You've been performing this unproblematic identity for so long that you've forgotten who you actually are. Someone asks what you want for dinner, and you genuinely don't know. Not because you have no preference, but because you've spent so many years suppressing your preferences that the signal is buried. Horney called this self-alienation. You're so disconnected from your real self, so committed to the idealized version, that you can't even access your authentic desires. And the apologies, they're the glue holding this false self together. Every time you apologize for having an opinion, you reinforce the idealized self. Every time you apologize for taking up space, you confirm that your real self is unacceptable. The brutal truth is this: being unproblematic is not the same as being lovable. In fact, it's often the opposite. Because the people who love you, who truly see you, they don't want a blank slate. They want you. Messy, complex, occasionally difficult you. But you've hidden that person so deep beneath layers of apologies that even you don't remember what they look like. The fourth sign. Deep down, you're angry, but you've buried it under apologies. Now we arrive at what Horney considered one of the most important insights of her career. The self-effacing personality, the person who constantly apologizes, is often sitting on a volcano of rage. But that rage is so unacceptable to them, so threatening to their carefully constructed identity, that they've buried it so deep they don't even know it's there. But it's there. Always. Horney called this basic anxiety, the feeling of being isolated and helpless in a potentially hostile world. And that anxiety, when it has nowhere to go, transforms into rage. Rage at the people who take advantage of your niceness. Rage at the world for not recognizing how much you sacrifice. Rage at yourself for being so weak, so desperate for approval that you've spent your entire life apologizing for existing. Think about the moments when this rage leaks out. Maybe it's passive aggression. You say yes to something you don't want to do. Then you're silently resentful. You do someone a favor. Then you're bitter they didn't appreciate it enough. Or maybe your rage shows up as sudden explosions. You're fine, apologizing and accommodating. And then one day something small happens and you lose it. You snap. And then immediately you're apologizing. Sorry, I don't know where that came from. Horney understood that this anger is actually healthy. It's your psyche's way of saying, this isn't right. You deserve better. You matter. But you've been taught that anger makes you unlovable, that expressing it makes you difficult. So you've learned to transform anger into apologies. Instead of saying, that hurt me, you say, sorry, I'm too sensitive. But here's what Horney knew. Repressed anger doesn't disappear. It goes underground. It becomes anxiety, depression, physical symptoms. It becomes passive aggression, self-sabotage, resentment that poisons every relationship. Because anger is energy. And energy doesn't vanish just because you refuse to acknowledge it. And there's something else. When you constantly apologize instead of expressing anger, you're training people that they can treat you poorly without consequences. You're teaching them that your boundaries are optional, that your feelings are negotiable. Horney believed that reclaiming your anger is essential to reclaiming yourself. Not acting out in rage, but acknowledging that anger is information. It tells you when your boundaries are being violated, when you're being treated unfairly. And when you can say, I'm angry about this, instead of, sorry, I'm probably overreacting, you reclaim your power. The fifth sign, you're exhausted and you don't know why. Here's the final sign, and it's the one that brings people to their breaking point. You're tired. Not just physically tired, though that too, but soul tired. Exhausted in a way that sleep doesn't fix. And you don't understand why. Because you're not doing anything that hard. You're just living your life, being nice, getting along. But you're so tired you can barely function. Horney would tell you exactly why. You're exhausted because you're living two lives. Your real life, with your real feelings and needs and desires. And the performance life, where you're constantly monitoring yourself, constantly apologizing, constantly shrinking to fit into spaces that were never meant for you. And maintaining that performance, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, is absolutely exhausting. Think about how much energy it takes to constantly police yourself. To think before every statement, is this going to bother someone? To weigh every action, am I being too much? To apologize before, during, and after every interaction. That's not living. That's endurance. And there's another layer. Horney understood that denying your real self requires enormous psychological energy. Your authentic feelings, needs, and reactions are still there. They don't disappear just because you've decided they're unacceptable. So part of you is constantly working to suppress them. It's like trying to hold a beach ball underwater. It takes constant effort. And it's exhausting. Horney wrote about what she called the exhaustion of the idealized self. When you're constantly trying to be someone you're not, constantly monitoring yourself for failure, constantly apologizing for falling short of impossible standards, you burn out. Because humans aren't designed to live in constant self-surveillance. We're designed to exist, to feel, to express, to take up space. And here's what makes it worse. You can't even acknowledge your exhaustion without apologizing for it. You're tired, but you feel guilty about being tired. You need rest, but you apologize for needing it. So you just keep going, keep apologizing, keep shrinking, until one day you can't anymore. Horney would want you to understand that this exhaustion is a message. It's your real self, the one you've been apologizing for and suppressing, trying desperately to get your attention. It's saying stop. This isn't sustainable. You can't live your whole life as an apology. And here, in this moment of exhaustion, is where Horney's most profound insight becomes clear. She said that the real self is not something you create. It's something you uncover. It's already there, beneath the apologies, beneath the performance, beneath the desperate need for approval. And reclaiming it doesn't require becoming someone new. It requires remembering who you were before the world taught you that existing required an apology. So if you're exhausted, if you recognize yourself in these patterns, if you feel the weight of spending your life as an apology, hear this. You are allowed to stop. You are allowed to exist without constantly justifying your existence. You are allowed to take up space, have needs, express anger, set boundaries, and be complicated without apologizing for any of it. Because the truth Karen Horney spent her career proving is this: you are not too much. You have never been too much. You have only been surrounded by people who were too little to hold all of you. And their smallness is not your fault. And it never required your apology. So here we are, at the end of this journey into the psychology of chronic apologizing. And if you've stayed with me this long, if you've recognized yourself in these patterns, I want you to take a deep breath. Because what Karen Horney understood, what she dedicated her life to teaching, is that awareness is the first step toward freedom. And you're aware now. You see the pattern. You understand what your apologies really mean. And now comes the choice. You can continue living as you have been, apologizing for existing, shrinking to make room for others. Or you can begin the terrifying, liberating work of reclaiming your real self. The self that has needs without shame. The self that feels anger without guilt. The self that takes up space without apology. Horney believed that this work, this journey from the idealized self to the real self, is the most important work a person can do. Because it's not just about stopping the apologies, it's about stopping the betrayal, the daily betrayal of yourself, the constant message you send to your own psyche that who you really are is unacceptable. And here's what she knew that changes everything. When you stop apologizing for being human, you don't become selfish, you become honest. When you stop shrinking to make others comfortable, you don't become difficult, you become real. And yourself, your real self, is not too much. It's exactly enough. It always has been. So start small. Notice when you're about to apologize. Pause. Ask yourself, did I actually do something wrong? Or am I just existing in a way that makes me uncomfortable? If it's the latter, try something revolutionary. Say nothing. Let the moment pass without apologizing for being in it. And then try something bigger. The next time you have a need, state it without apology. I need support right now. Not, sorry, I know you're busy. Just, I need support. Feel how different that is. How clean. How honest. How terrifying. How free. Karen Horney spent decades studying the human psyche, and one truth emerged again and again in her work. We cannot love others authentically while hating ourselves. We cannot build real connections while performing a false self. We cannot be truly intimate while constantly apologizing for existing. The work of reclaiming your real self is the only path to genuine love, both love from others and the love you've been denying yourself every time you've apologized for being human. So stop apologizing, start existing, start taking up space, start being complicated and messy and occasionally difficult, start being yourself. Because that self, the one you've been apologizing for your entire life, is exactly who you were meant to be. And the world needs her. Not the apologetic version, not the convenient version, but the real, whole, unapologetic you. That's the psychological truth Karen Horney spent her life revealing. And if you've heard it today, truly heard it, then something has already shifted. You can feel it. The possibility of living differently, of being yourself without apology, of finally being free.